Page 226 of The Unfolding is the story of Chris Baker.
I just started sobbing. And I looked at Lisa and I go, this is what's wrong. I've run from God. Jesus has been here in the worst parts of my life. And I saw those. I saw Dante's funeral. I saw me in the hospital after I got shot. And I'm like, he's been there the whole time.
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Wow. Another page in The Unfolding.
Do you need to do a 180? Hey, this is Meredith Foster. Is there an area of your life that doesn't need tweaking? It needs demolition, complete reconstruction. Chris Baker has devoted his life to helping people walk out the words of 2 Corinthians 5:17. It says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, and see, the new has come." As the founder of Ink180, Chris has given away more than $2 million worth of free tattoos. Not just any tattoos. These are tattoo cover-ups and removals for people who are making a change in their life. Former gang members, sex trafficking survivors, domestic violence survivors. He takes something that marked them with shame and fear and transforms it into something beautiful that marks new life. This is a story that will give you hope that you can make a 180. Even the ugliest parts of your past can be transformed into something beautiful.
Life was pretty much mayhem. So I grew up in a broken home. My parents divorced when I was about 13 years old. Domestic violence was a pretty prevalent issue in my home. And my dad and mom split. My dad left the country, went to the UK. Mostly to get away from paying child support and all that. He was a pretty bad example of a father. He was a drug addict and alcoholic when I was a kid, very abusive. But after he left, my mom, my little sister, Courtney, and I moved to South Central. We were living in Orange County, California before that. Nice middle class, comfortable lifestyle. And when he split, we moved to South Central because that's all we could afford. It was pretty interesting. You know, the first day after we moved into this tiny little, very small apartment, I walked across the street because there was a park there and I used to play basketball and I saw a bunch of kids in there playing ball and they're all wearing Chicago Bulls gear. And this is before Michael Jordan. I'm like, why are these guys, we're in the middle of LA and, you know, Laker town. Like, why are these guys wearing Bulls gear? Well, I found out pretty quick. I was in the middle of a gang neighborhood and these are the guys that would become my friends growing up. And you know, I was never about that life. I was never involved in the gangs. I was an artist. I've always been an artist in different forms. And they knew that I wasn't about that life, so they really never tried to drag me into it. But, you know, growing up, I lost 17 of my friends to their gang activities.
Oh, my goodness. What was your first experience with seeing something violent in that way? Do you remember?
Yeah, I was 14, and my buddy Tony was across the street from that park. And he was a gang member. He was selling drugs, and he got robbed, and they cut his throat, and he bled to death on the sidewalk. And it was the thing to me, like that should never be normal to anybody, and it certainly wasn't. It was my first experience seeing any kind of violence like that. But there were people that would literally were walking on that same sidewalk and walked right around him and kept going, like it was no big deal. That was just kind of the environment we were living in.
That had to be major culture shock. I don't even know that culture shock is necessarily a big enough word to capture it, but such a shock to you as a 13, 14-year-old.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd never even seen stuff like that in the movies or TV, you know, and here I am in the midst of it. And, you know, one minute he's here and the next minute he's gone. And it was almost like life went on. Wow. To everybody else except me. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. I still can't.
And that was just the beginning.
Yeah, that was the beginning of it. I got shot when I was 16. I was wrong place, wrong time. I still have 12 gauge bird shot in my right arm. Got stabbed when I was 18 trying to break up a fight. Terrible idea. It never makes sense. It never made sense to me. Still doesn't make sense. And
so you grew up and were surrounded by that. When you graduated from high school, what did you think you were going to do? And
I had no idea. You know, when my parents split, the last thing that my dad ever said to me was, "You're probably not going to do anything special in your life. Just do the best you can." So to me, like I got a job. I was working in warehousing, and I was just working my tail off to try and get, up through the ranks and make as much money as I could, because at that point in my life, that's what I thought success was: financial success, house, cars, marriage,
getting out of that neighborhood.
And we did. We moved from South Central LA out to Corona, which is Inland Empire, about 30 miles east of like Anaheim area. So we did that when we started our family. But I was still in close contact with all my old friends who were still stuck in Carson.
How did you meet your wife? Is that an important part of the story?
It is. Lisa and I met in high school. So she was, I was an aide in my biology class, and it was one of my electives. And I got a phone call one day from a girl who I didn't know after school. And she's like, "You're in my biology class, and I think you're really cute, and we should go out." And I was like, wow, a girl's calling me. This is new. But it ended up being, it was her best friend that actually made the call for her. But,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, we've been married this year. We'll celebrate 31 years.
And you,
married.
Oh my goodness. Did you marry right after high school?
No, I think I was 23 and she was 21 when we got married, but yeah.
And so then you moved out, decided you're going to start your family out there, but you're working in this warehouse job, trying to work your way up. At what point did the situation with Dante happen?
It was 19 years ago. So I was, right after my youngest daughter, Quinn, was born. So we're living in Corona. And so Dante, he was in jail. He was a gang leader. He was a blood. And he went to jail for some crimes that he pled guilty to. And we would go visit him. Every couple of months, I'd drive up to LA and visit him in jail. And he started telling me some stuff about a year before he got released. And he's like, "Yeah, man, I started going to church." And I was like, "Come on, what are you talking about?"
But wait, was there any faith stuff in your background?
I mean, I believed in God. My mom is Irish Catholic, so I got dragged to Catholic church a little bit when I was a kid, but I believed in God. I knew there was a higher power. But at that time in my life, I thought he was this big angry guy that sat on a cloud and pointed his finger at me every time I did something stupid. And those times were plentiful. Other than that, I really didn't go to church. I had a lot of people in my life that were, quote, Christians that, quite frankly, when I looked at them, they just didn't seem very welcoming to me. Like that, I don't really want that in my life. If that's what God's about, that's not what I'm looking for. Judgment instead of... Yeah, very judgmental, very, if you don't get your life together, you're going to go to hell. And, you need to raise your kids better, and just horrible stuff. And, the thing is, my old life I wasn't a bad person. I don't think I've ever been a bad person. I just wasn't doing anything good for anybody else. I was very driven by money and career and providing for my family, because that was my understanding of what it meant to be a man. Again, wasn't a bad guy. I've always had a great relationship with my wife. I think when you grow up in a situation with domestic violence like I did, you can go one of two ways. You can follow it and cop out and say, "Oh, well, that's just what I learned growing up, so that's why I am the way I am." Or you can look at it and be, "I don't want any part of that." And that's the path I took. And I was really blessed too, because Lisa's parents were incredible. Her dad, God rest his soul, Mike Vittoria, was just, in my opinion, the greatest example of a father and husband I've ever experienced in my life. And he really rubbed off on me. You were welcomed into that family. Absolutely. Wow. What a difference when one person, one influence can make. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Huge, huge influence. And I miss him every day. So faith hasn't really, you didn't have a real positive perspective on religion anyway. True. But you believe in God, and you're going to visit Dante, and he starts talking about church. Yeah. So I'm in the jail, and we're on the little phones in the visiting area, and he's like, "Yeah, man, I've been going to church." And I said, "Well, why? How did that happen?" And he said, "Well, they told us if we go to church on Sundays, we get an extra hour of recreational time every day." And he's like, "So I wanted to play basketball, so I went to church." He's like, "But no, man." He's like, "I really started listening." I was like, "Well, that's cool." And he didn't try and drill it into me or anything like that at all. It was just very, "Hey, this is what I'm doing, and I'm really enjoying it." He ended up getting baptized when he was still locked up. He got released, and we did what we always did. We threw a party at his mom's place. We were there all day, all the guys from the neighborhood coming in and out, barbecuing, playing dominoes, cards, and being a bunch of knuckleheads. But how old were you at this point? Oh my gosh. So I was older. So this is just 19 years ago. I'm 53 now. And had a great day. We're catching up. And, kind of looking back, I feel terrible about it because he was telling us all about his new life in a non-threatening way, right? Just excited about his new life. And we're like, man, you're going to be back doing the same stuff you did before you got.
He was telling you about Jesus?
Yeah. And he was planting major seeds. So that night, about 7:30, all the wives and girlfriends kind of headed out and the guys stuck around. And about 11 o'clock that night, we were heading out to the front and getting ready to say our goodbyes. And so we lived on Centerview Avenue in Carson. And all the streetlights had been shot out because the drug dealers do that. So cops don't see what's going on. So it was pretty dark. And at 11:47 p.m., there were 6 of us left. And we're all out kind of by the curb saying our final goodbyes for the night, and a silver Chevy Tahoe came creeping down the street with its headlights cut out and passenger window rolled down and a 12-gauge shotgun stuck out the window. And they called out Dante's old street name from the gang, and one shot rang out, hit him right in the chest.
Oh my gosh.
And he got thrown back. I mean, he got hit from like 15 yards, so very close range. And
you were standing there.
I was 3 feet away from him when he got hit. Yeah. And he bled to death in my arms. And the cops came, the paramedics came. There was nothing. I mean, he was gone. And nothing anybody could do. The coroner came about 3:30 in the morning. The police released us to leave. And I called my wife, Lisa, and I told her what happened, because I didn't want her to freak out when I walked through the front door. I was wearing khaki shorts and a white t-shirt, and it was just blood everywhere. She met me at the door with a garbage bag and told me to take all that stuff off and throw it in the bag. And I went and took a shower, and we sat up the rest of the night talking. We'd been talking about leaving LA. We had lived through the riots. We had lived through the gang wars. We had lived through all this stuff, and we didn't want any part of living in Southern California anymore. It's just everything is a show. Everything is about money. Everything is fake. Again, this is before faith hit me, but Dante had planted these seeds, and I was just so over everything that was Southern California at the time.
So in a moment where you're already thinking about going, and then this traumatic event, which I assume you'd experienced other things like this so much.
Yeah, it was always something, and people ask me a lot about growing up out there, and I'm like, I was an artist. Like I said, I've always been an artist. And one of the art forms that I took up was airbrushing. Every time there was a funeral, I ended up doing airbrush t-shirts for everybody to wear. And I have a collection of these shirts that I keep for no other reason than to remind me what God had brought me through.
Wow. But in that moment, in your conversation with Lisa, those seeds had been planted by Dante, but that's not what you were thinking about. You're just ready to get out.
I just wanted out. And so did she.
She was ready.
She was even more ready than I was.
Okay.
Lisa's always kind of been that voice of reason for me, for sure. And she has so much wisdom and clarity and stuff. And I was always like, no, it'll be okay. And she's like, no, it's not.
It's not good.
This is not okay. And Lisa, before she moved to Southern California as a child, she was born in Chicago. So I always kind of laugh when I speak in churches and I talk about this story, my backstory. And I tell people, Lisa and I got together and we talked and we said, we don't want any more of this violence. So what did we do? We moved to Chicago, right? Where nothing bad ever happens.
So is the reason you went to Chicago because she had lived there?
Yeah. And she has a huge family. So Lisa's Italian. She's got a big Italian family and we love her family's amazing, and her uncles and aunts and cousins and stuff. So we wanted our kids to grow up around family and just have that experience. So we decided to move to Chicagoland. We're in the southwest suburbs. We don't live up in the city.
You had talked about you had kind of started in a warehouse and you were working your way up. At that point, what kind of work were you doing?
Yeah, I was doing logistics project management. So I started offloading like UPS trucks as a 16-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Worked my way up through management, into corporate operations, did some training in project management, lean warehousing, and all that stuff. So I was in that world, I was very successful. Financially, I was very successful. And I was tattooing on the side because I was always passionate about it.
When did you do your first tattoo?
I got my first tattoo on my 18th birthday to make my mom furious, and it worked. It absolutely worked.
Oh boy! Wait, what was the tattoo? Can you describe
it was so ridiculous. It's been covered up now.
Okay.
It was literally my own initials, CB, on my right bicep.
Okay.
And it was, so the funny thing is, my mom, again, she was very Catholic at that point in her life. And I had moved out of the house when I was 16 because I thought I knew everything. And she called me on my 18th birthday to wish me a happy birthday. And she's like, "Oh, son, you're a man today. What are you going to do?" I was like, "Yeah, Mom, I'm going to get my first tattoo today." And she got real quiet for a minute. And she's like, "Christopher, I raised you better than that. You better not get a tattoo. I'll disown you." I'm like, "Mom, I moved out when I was 16 because all you had in the house was ramen noodles. Like, what are you going to take away from me?" And I got the tattoo and she was furious. And then she kind of got over it. I got another one. She got furious. It was this vicious cycle. But about 12 or so years ago, her and my stepdad, they live in Phoenix now, and they were coming out for the holidays. And I called her. I said, "Mom, what do you want for Christmas? I want to get you something." And she's like, No, please don't buy me anything. I was like, "Ma," kind of going back and forth, like, come on, like, we're both adults here. Let's act like it. And she's like, "Well, I was going to wait until I got out there to talk to you." I was like, "Okay, what's up?" She's like, "I think I want you to do a tattoo for me." And I was like, "Oh, really?" Goodness. I said, "Let me rewind this and go back to a conversation we had on my 18th birthday." And I was just kind of giving her a hard time, and she just goes, "Christopher." I was like, "Okay, we're good."
The full name. So you're in trouble.
I did the tattoo for her. It's just,
that's great.
It's hilarious.
So you got your first at 18. When did you start doing tattoos? I mean, you already were, you'd always been artistic, but.
Yeah. So I actually started doing tattoos unprofessionally using my mom's sewing kit when I was 15.
Really?
And quite honestly, that's how I stayed alive growing up in South Central, because everybody was like, "Oh, Chris will do tattoos for us." And they always took care of us. Like, it was insane. Like
it was a protection almost, you're saying?
Yeah, kind of.
A favor?
They loved that I did this stuff. I mean, they loved me. We're true brothers, and we still are. Those that are still around, but that was my thing, and they knew that the gang thing wasn't my deal. And
so you never felt forced into anything.
Never, no. Okay. And people ask me that, and that's a highly unusual thing in that world too, because a lot of times people are kind of forced into it, and it's like you don't have a choice. The thing with me, I think that was the biggest reason that didn't happen to me was my mom kind of became like the block mom, because that was the height of the crack epidemic. And most of my friends didn't ever have their dad around in their lives, and their moms were either strung out on crack or they were working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep the lights on.
To survive.
Yeah. So my mom fed everybody and just, for lack of a better term, loved on everybody and treated them all like they were her kids. And they knew that I wasn't about it, and neither was she. Mm-hmm. She wouldn't have had it.
So you started doing tattoos when you're 15 with your mom's sewing kit.
Oh yeah.
When did that transition to I don't know, more official or whatever?
So I did it. I was doing the warehousing work, and I was making good money, and I was working crazy hours. But I had a good friend of mine, Larry Casas, was a tattoo artist, and he was doing all my tattoos, and that's when I started doing my sleeves and stuff. And I would take him designs to tattoo on me. And he was like, "Man, this is cool." And this is kind of like the birth of the internet, right? We didn't have, Pinterest and all this stuff that people bring in now, but he would ask me, like, "Where are you getting these designs that you're bringing in for me to tattoo on you?" I'm like, "I draw them." He's like, "Man, if you can draw like this, I should teach you how to tattoo." And that was kind of it. So I would go work at my warehouse job. I worked first shift. So I worked from like 4 in the morning until 1:30 in the afternoon. And then I'd go to the shop and do like another 5 or 6 hours at the shop. Yeah.
Because you loved it?
I truly loved tattooing. So when I was a little kid, my uncle, was my mom's brother, was a Hell's Angel biker, and his buddy owned a tattoo shop down in Long Beach, California. And he would pick me up on the weekends when my mom had to work, and he'd be like, "Hey, come on, we're going to go to the tattoo shop." And I was like, "Let's go." So I'd be sitting on the counter of this tattoo shop watching these bikers get tattooed all day. And I fell in love with it. I think kind of the mysterious. At that point in time, tattoos were not globally accepted.
Not mainstream.
Not at all. So it was like bikers, gangsters, and military. And it was all men. That's all you ever saw in the shop. Like women wouldn't even come along. And it's so crazy to sit and think that, because here we are in 2025. And, in my regular side of my business, it's probably 90% female clients.
No kidding.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
So interesting, the change.
Yeah.
Okay. So he taught you how, so you started doing it on the side.
Yeah.
So now we're at the point where you've made the decision to move to Chicago. What were you going to do work-wise? Did you know?
Yeah, I actually transferred with my company.
Okay.
And they transferred me to Chicago, paid for the move. It was really, really a blessing. Moved, got a house in Joliet with my family, and life was pretty good until it wasn't when I got laid off.
Oh no.
And I'd been with this company for 20 plus years, and the economy was hit, and a number of people got downsized, and I don't have a bad thing to say about the company. They really took care of us, with severance pay and all this stuff. They were really great about it. I hated it though, because I'd been working for this company forever.
How old were your kids at that point?
They were probably 5, 6, 9, the 3 kids. And it was hard. We had this big house, in Joliet. And I thought that was, big brand new house. And I was like, I'm successful. I got out of the hood. I got away from California. I bought my family this dream house. We have great, nice cars. We have money in the bank. Everything's great. Everybody's happy. Then I got laid off. It was hard. I was a high school dropout. I dropped out of high school to help support my mom and my sister financially. And I went back and I finished my high school, but I didn't have any college. This is the time when the economy was just absolutely a dumpster fire. You couldn't find any job. Any job I applied for was half the money I was getting paid. I had always had, various mental health concerns due to what I experienced growing up and everything. But I also grew up with a father that would say things like, oh, men don't go to counseling, suck it up, be a man, dust yourself off, knock it off. That really resonated a lot. And I had this stigma, and there is such a stigma related to mental health care in this country, unfortunately. But Lisa came to me one night, and I've told this story a bunch of times, but I was suicidal and I was done. I wanted out. Lisa came to me one night. I was downstairs in our basement watching a baseball game and had the lights all off watching the game. And she came down and hit pause and she turned the light on. She's like, I need to talk to you. I said, okay. She said, I'm really, really worried about you right now. You're not yourself. This is kind of the darkest I've seen you. And I think that we should go together and talk to somebody to get you some help. And I'll tell you, I don't say this proudly at all. My response to my wife was, good, let's go see a counselor and they can tell you all the things that you're doing wrong as my wife to make me feel this way. That's how dark I was, how arrogant and self-centered and all the other horrible things I was.
Did you feel like the state that you were in was everybody else's fault?
I don't know. I think part of me did. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, and she was a fantastic stay-at-home mom, and she busted her back to make sure everything was taken care of, and certainly did not deserve that statement being said at her at any point. Yeah. I think it was just kind of a lashing out thing. I think I was just so done with life. I was just, anybody that came at me, I was going to lash out.
Right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, let's do it. And she gets on Facebook and she asks friends, hey, does anyone know a good counselor that we could talk to for some help? And all these friends were calling her. And it was funny because the same name and place kept coming up. Numerous conversations, probably 7 or 8 different people. They said, oh, you have to go see Joan Guest at the Samaritan Interfaith Counseling Center in Naperville. I'm like, every time it would come up, I was like, interfaith, that's church, man. We don't do church. I believe in God, but I'm not going to get browbeaten by some Christian person telling me I'm going to go to hell and all this stuff. Finally, after the 8th or 9th person recommended her, I was like, she must be good because they had some real problems and they're doing great now. So we'll give her a shot. So it was a Saturday morning. I'll never forget. It was freezing cold outside. I get dressed. I'm wearing sweat shorts and a t-shirt and a hoodie.
Are you just a shorts guy?
All year.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, the main reason I did that is just I'm covered in tattoos. I'm like, I don't care what this woman thinks of me and my tattoos. Almost kind of daring her to push me away. Right. And I walk in and we're filling out our intake paperwork in the lobby. And she walks in to the lobby to get us. It's hilarious. It's one of my favorite stories ever because Joan, God bless her, God rest her soul, she passed a couple of years ago. She looked exactly like Dana Carvey as the church lady on Saturday Night Live.
Oh my goodness.
Like the long dress with the long sleeves and the cuffs like all the way to her knuckles and the horn-rimmed glasses and the perm and the whole deal. And I would just laugh and I look at Lisa, I'm like, this woman is going to destroy me in this room.
With judgment, right?
Absolutely.
Is that what you thought?
Oh, 100%.
Yep.
So we walked back down this long hallway to her office. Of course, it was the last office. We walk in there and we sit on this old like 1970s couch. All over her walls, she has those terrible cat motivational posters, like the hang in there poster. In fact, funny side story, Lisa just bought me one of those posters for Christmas and framed it to hang at the shop. But we sat down and I'll tell you, so it's Lisa and I sitting side by side and Joan was across the room from us and we're just kind of putting everything out there. I had apologized previously to Lisa about what I had said and I really thought she was right. I was like, I really do need some help here. I wasn't against it. And we kind of just poured everything out there. You know, we agreed on one thing completely. We wanted to save our marriage and we wanted me to get some help. And we just started talking. And I tell people all the time, people that are real skeptical about going to counseling, I tell them like it was like sitting in a room with my favorite aunt that I haven't seen in years and just drinking coffee and catching up. And there was such a peace about her. I really liked her and Lisa really liked her too. So we booked an appointment for the following Saturday to really dig into things and start the work. And I was grabbing my hoodie to get ready to go. And she looks at me and she goes, oh, Chris, hang on a second. I like to offer to pray for my clients before we wrap up. And I was like, oh, here we go.
Have anybody prayed for you?
Nope.
Ever?
Very few.
Okay.
Very few. And I looked at Lisa, who was sitting right next to me. I was like, and I looked at Joan. I said, you know what, Joan, if you think it's going to help, go for it. Like, I'm open to whatever at this point. And just, again, very arrogant. And Joan started to pray. And I remember from being a kid, my grandma would always tell me, you know, we fold our hands when we pray and we bow our heads and we close our eyes. Because if you don't close your eyes, Jesus doesn't pay attention to your prayer. And so I'm sitting there in this chair next to my wife and Joan starts to pray for us. And it was the most amazing prayer I've probably still ever heard in my life. And she was asking Jesus for us to be open to new ways of communicating and new ways of listening and not being afraid of the past. And there was just such a peace as she's praying for us. And I am sitting there. I didn't hear a voice or anything like that, but I had this thought kind of pop into my brain. And then it was like a slot machine wheel. And it was like, stop running. I'm here. I've been here all along. Stop running. I'm right here. And it hit me. And I just started sobbing. And Joan's still praying and Lisa's sitting next to me and I can kind of hear her maybe crying a little bit, but I don't know if she's crying because I'm crying hard. Like it was that ugly cry where they probably had to change the carpet after we left. It was just not good, but it was beautiful at the same time. Joan finished up the prayer and it took me a good few minutes to kind of compose myself. And I looked at Lisa and I go, this is what's wrong. I've run from God. Like Jesus has been here in the worst parts of my life. And I saw those as I'm sitting there, like collecting my thoughts. I saw Dante's funeral. I saw T's funeral. I saw Joey's funeral, like all these things. I saw me in the hospital after I got shot and stabbed, like all this stuff. And I'm like, he's been there the whole time.
Through it all, his father's abuse, the gang violence, the loss of so many friends, through every unimaginably hard ordeal, Jesus had been there. Chris was beginning to understand that no matter what was ahead, Jesus would be with him.
Lisa was, she didn't know what to say because I was always the guy. I had friends and stuff that would go to church and like, hey, why don't you come to my church? We're having a concert and it's your kind of music. I think you like it. And I would always hide behind the stupid jokes of like, well, if I walk in your church, the roof will cave in and I'll spontaneously combust and blah, blah. That was all just hiding behind fear because all of a sudden, because this woman, Joan Guest, who didn't owe me a thing, prayed for me authentically and she meant that prayer. I went to church the next day, like the next day? Sunday morning, I was in church by myself. I went to a non-denominational church. She had to work that day. So I was like, I'll go check it out. And if I like it, we'll go together next Sunday. And she's like, yeah, okay, cool, whatever. So I go. The pastor had just gotten back from Haiti. So this is like after the earthquake and all that stuff. And they'd been going there for a number of years, but he's showing this school and this church that they were building up in the mountains of Western Haiti. And he's talking about it. And he's like, yeah, we're going back in June. We're looking for, 10 to 15 people. You don't have to have any construction experience or anything. If you want to go, come talk to me. So I went and talked to this pastor right after church who I had just met before the service. And he knew it was my first time in church of my own free will. I said, I want to go to Haiti. And he's like, well, do you want to think about it? I go, no, I want to go to Haiti. I hear people all the time say, yeah, I felt a real nudge to go on this serving trip or this mission trip. I didn't feel a nudge. I felt like I got kicked in the backside. Like, you're going to go, you're going to be changed, and you're going to love it. I asked the pastor, I said, what does it take? How much is the trip? And he said, well, it's a $700 deposit, and then we help you fundraise the rest. Perfect. So I go out to my truck and I get a checkbook. And now I was out of work at this time. Lisa and I had done our budget that morning before she left for work, and we had $719 in the bank for 10 days. And I go and I write this pastor a check for $700. And I'm floating on air the whole day. I'm so excited. I'm like, I went to Family Christian stores. I bought my first Bible. I'm like, I'm all in. Lisa gets home from work. She was working at Target doing customer service. It's like during the holidays or right after the holidays. And she's just wiped out from humanity. And I'm making dinner for the family in the kitchen, and she comes in and sits down. I get her a glass of water, and we're just kind of chatting. She's like, oh, how was church today? So I start talking a billion miles an hour. I'm like, oh my gosh, it was so great. They welcomed me there. The music was great. The pastor was so nice. The message was like he was just talking straight to me, and the people were so nice. And the pastor just got back from Haiti, and I'm going to go to Haiti with him in June and help finish building this school and this orphanage and church. And she's like, okay, well, tell me more about that. And I told her exactly what happened. And I said, she's like, okay, that sounds amazing. Like, how much is the trip? And I told her, and I said, I wrote him a deposit check for $700. Most spouses hearing that, knowing that we just did our budget and had $719 would flip out. Like, are you out of your mind? Not Lisa. She was like, okay, sounds good. And we made it work. And I'll tell you, I went to Haiti that summer for the first time, and my pastor pulled me aside before we left. And he said, you're going to go there, you're going to do great work, and you're going to come back, but a piece of your heart is always going to stay in Haiti when you see what you see. And he was so right. And that was exactly what I needed to see at that point when this faith was so new to me, was people that have absolutely nothing in the ways of worldly possessions. They have nothing. They don't have running water. They don't have electricity. They sleep on dirt floors and eat whatever they can grow. I go down there and I'm just like slammed upside the head by this, because to me, my stuff was what I was defined by. I spent the first 38 years of my life trying to fill a Jesus-shaped hole in my heart with stuff, and it never worked. But I go down there and I see people who have to walk 10 miles each way to get water that we wouldn't even think about drinking here. The whole time they're doing it, they're singing songs of praise and praying, and they're thankful for everything. It just flipped a switch in me, and I was like, I need to do life way different.
You think about when you surrendered to Jesus, however you want to say it. Would you say it happened during that prayer with Joan, or was it
right at the end of it?
That's so amazing.
And I was all in. And Lisa was looking at me like, who are you? Like, I was radically awakened, and all at once, like, here we go. It's going to be so much different. And I'll tell you, the thing is, my kids are 26, 22, and 19 now. They say it all the time. They refer to me as old dad and new dad. And I'll tell you, that's equal parts amazing and heartbreaking. The thing with old dad was always a loving dad. I always cared about my kids and took care of the kids and stuff, but I wasn't present. I wasn't truly present for my kids or my wife because I was so focused on earning and making money and getting them what they wanted. And now they look at it and they're like, well, new dad. And I'm like, well, which dad do you like better? And they're like, new dad, way better. Because if God forbid, if I got called home tonight, like, I would know going to heaven that I was there for my kids, and they knew me and I know them, and my wife, and we were truly the family that God designed us to be.
Was Lisa on board with the faith thing as well?
She was, for sure. So she grew up in a Lutheran household, and they went to church occasionally, probably like Christmas and Easter kind of thing, She was definitely open to it. I think she was more shocked that I was, But Lisa is much more deliberate than I am. So she's more of a, well, let me stick my toes in the water and see how this feels. So, no two people are ever exactly on the same part in their paths, right? So, she's come a long, long way this a number of years, but she at first was very like, I like this, but is this going to last kind of thing?
Yeah.
And, but yeah, she's supported it the whole way.
Tell me about that first year, just as obviously you are living life really differently as you look back on, just like your kids saying, new dad, what happened to you in terms of like work? I mean, you're trusting God to provide.
So I got a job and it wasn't great, but it was okay. It was paying the bills. But my thing was, it was so different because it wasn't my number one priority anymore. I really started praying at that point. That first year, God showed me so much, not just that trip to Haiti, but it was funny because my pastor came to me one day and he goes, hey, I had an idea and I wanted to approach you with it. He said, I wanted to see if you wanted to help lead part of the youth group. And I'm like, Pastor, I'm just trying to get right with Jesus. Like, what could I possibly offer these kids? And he's like, no, he said, I think that he has a bigger plan for it. I think that these kids are going to show you some things. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means, but let me think about it and pray about it. And I did. And I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. I'm not the leader. I was just another person helping out. So what do? They give me all the high school boys. So I give Chris all the crazy high school boys because maybe they'll listen to him. He's big and tattooed and looks kind of scary. And so we started talking. We're doing this we're going through this whole teaching series where we're talking about using our gifts from God to bless those around us. What I came to learn about these kids, a number of them were artistic. I'm like, what kind of art do you do? Oh, I paint. Oh, I draw. I do airbrushing. No, I was the only tattooer, right? But we all had a passion for art. And I was thinking about it and I was like, man, growing up in LA, one of the things I did graffiti murals. And I did my very first commissioned graffiti mural when I was 14 and I loved it. And people loved it, and it was cool. It brought something beautiful to the neighborhood, and so I brought it to this group. And I was like, "What do you guys think? You want to do this?" Like, yeah, that sounds awesome. So we knew we wanted to go down to Joliet. There's this part of Joliet called the Hills, a real rough gang neighborhood, kind of notorious area. So I reached out to a couple friends with the Joliet PD for protection. I'm like, hey, can you have somebody, whether it's just a community service officer or somebody, come just sit there while we're doing this? Because we're covering up gang graffiti and they don't really care for that. And we were doing it and the kids were loving it and I was loving it. The community was loving it. The kids were bringing friends along too. And so these kids were getting access to the word and it was beautiful. And in that same time, I was really deep in prayer about it. I was like, Lord, this is cool and I love doing this and it's fun, but like, I want to know what my purpose is. Like, why am I really here? I have 17 friends who aren't. I've been shot. I've been stabbed. I could have been one of the other statistics. And why do you still have me here? What do you want me to do? And then we came down to this path of him blessing me with the ministry of Ink180.
So how did that start? You were doing tattoos on the side already.
Yep.
Did that business continue to grow?
Yeah, I was doing it. It brought me peace. It was just like art. And
it was still a side job though, right? It was
still a side job, yeah, but it was helping us pay the bills at that time too because money was tight. It was interesting because I was tattooing people in my basement of my house. I set up a little studio in the house and then God said, I was asking, like, what do you want me to do? Break my heart for what breaks yours. I'll do anything you want me to do. The answer that I got was go use the gifts that I gave you to help people that are trying to change their lives. Just immediately saw pictures of my friends. I said, Dante was the first one. They were all covered in tattoos, mostly that I put on them, representing their gang affiliations and different things. And it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, like God wants me to use the gift of art to cover up gang tattoos for people who are trying to change their lives like Dante was and T was and all these other guys. And it hit me and I got super excited, almost as excited as I was that day with Joan when she prayed. And I ran upstairs and I talked to Lisa and I go, oh my gosh, I think I know what my calling is. So I told her about it and she said, that's amazing. I love it. She said, it's huge. And she said, where are you going to do it and how are we going to pay for it? And I said, well, I've got the studio downstairs. I said, we'll probably only do like 2 or 3 a month. So it's not going to be a huge financial burden. She again was like, okay. Most wives that I know would freak out at the notion of you bringing in gang members to your basement tattoo studio to do cover-up tattoos.
I love Lisa.
And she's amazing.
Uh-huh.
That woman has saved my life numerous times, and I'm not ashamed to say it. She's the biggest blessing in my life. But she was like, yeah, okay. So I was doing gang cover-ups in my basement studio while my kids were upstairs doing homework.
Now, explain for somebody who's not familiar with, like, what is the cover-up? What does that mean? How does that work?
Yeah, essentially, basically, you're just doing a new tattoo to cover up the old one, to kind of camouflage out the old
What's
tattoo.
a typical gang tattoo look like?
Gosh, there's so many. So, like, different gangs have different symbols. For example, Latin Kings use a 5-pointed crown as one of their symbols. They also use a lion's head. Gangster disciples use pitchforks. Satan's disciples they often will tattoo horns on their upper forehead area. There's just so many. When people are in gang life, they get different tattoos as they reach certain levels of leadership in the gang. So they have a lot of hand tattoos, face tattoos, because when they're in that life, they want that to be known. They're not ashamed of it. They want you to look at them and walk the other way. And the minute that they're done with that life, they want to get rid of it.
But that's not an easy thing to do. So a cover-up then is doing new art on top of that and transforming what it looks like.
Right. So we weren't doing removals at that point. So we were doing this in the house, and it was funny because WGN came and did a news story.
What year was this?
Oh,
Do you remember?
Gosh, it was probably 2011. Yeah, WGN comes down, and we actually filmed it at the church, which was interesting, doing a tattoo in my church, something I never thought I would be able to do. But I got a phone call a couple days later from the health department in Kendall County. My heart stopped because you cannot tattoo anywhere but a tattoo shop. It's illegal. You have to be certified. And they called me, and they were actually quite lovely. And they said, hey, we saw the story on WGN. We love what you're doing. Can we get together and just talk? I was like, oh gosh, I'm like super guarded. I'm like, they're going to arrest me and like all this stuff. Right. And I go in, and they said, hey, listen, we know you did the tattoo at the church. Where are you doing that? I said, honestly, I'm doing it at my house. And they said, we really can't allow that. And I said, I understand completely. And I thought it was done at that point. I was like, I have no money. I can't open a studio.
Were you like, God, what's going on here?
Yeah, a little bit. But I knew at that point, I was like, I know something's going to happen. So anyway, I'm driving home from that meeting, and they gave me all the guidelines for everything I would need to open a tattoo shop to make them happy, which is unusual for the health department. I'm driving back to my house from that meeting, and I get a phone call from my pastor, and he's like, hey, you need to go by the bank and talk to Tom. Tom went to our church. He was the president of the local bank. And I said, why? I don't have an account there. And he goes, that's what he wants to talk to you about. He wants to do a loan so you could open a studio. And I pulled off the road and drove to his bank, and I sat down with him, and he's like, I saw this story on the news. I want to help you open a studio. And I'm like, this is something I never could have imagined would happen. And we're talking and asking me these questions, and he gives me this big packet of paperwork to fill out. He goes, I want you to go home, fill this out, bring me a copy of your last 2 years' tax returns. So I walked him through. I had a business plan made, and I'd had one for a while.
To open a tattoo shop?
Yeah, and it was like 3 different tiers, like bare bones just to make it happen, a little bit higher level stuff, and then if I ever won the lottery. So he's like, well, walk me through the middle of the road one. And I did, and it was like $15,000, right? And he's shaking his head, and he's like, no. In my head, I'm like, see, he can't do anything to help me. Like, all these negative thoughts were creeping in. He said, you don't need $15,000 to do this. He said, you need about 30. I was like, oh. I was like, I didn't think I was going to get 15. I'm definitely not getting 30, right? So he's like, yeah, did you fill out the paperwork? I said, yeah, but I said, I don't want to waste your time. Like, my credit's horrible. We had lost a house due to foreclosure because I wasn't making enough money. So just all this stuff. He's like, let me take your paperwork and let me see what I can do. And I said, Tom, what's the approval process like for this kind of a loan? He's like, what? I said, yeah, what's the approval process like? He's like, you just went through it. Give me your paperwork. Come back in 2 days, and I'll have a check for $30,000 for you. And I lost it again. And
sobbing?
Yeah. And went home, called a friend who did commercial real estate. And I said, I'm looking for a tattoo shop. And he kind of laughed. He's like, where do you want it? I said, Oswego. That's where I live. And he goes, you won't get a tattoo shop in Oswego. I said, guess again. It's going to happen. He said, Chris, people have tried. They've never approved it. They say they don't have the zoning for it. They won't allow it. They don't want a tattoo shop in Oswego.
Describe Oswego for people who...
Oswego, Illinois it's a great town. We still live there. It's, I think, 40,000 people, kind of what I like to call the edge of civilization, kind of right before all the cornfields start between here and Iowa.
But on the other side, Chicago is how far away?
I'm about 40 minutes outside of Chicago.
Okay.
So I tell people all the time, I moved from Mayhem in LA to Mayberry in Oswego, because it's what it's like. It's just this real small town. Everybody knows each other, and it's really great.
So your real estate friend is saying nobody's going to approve that in this small town.
He's like, Chris, there's no way they're going to allow that. And I was like, well, find me some places. So he takes me to the first place, and I was like, this is it. He's like, you don't want to even look at the other four? I'm like, no, this is it. It just felt right. And the thing I liked most about it was kind of a hidden spot, because 85% of my work is nonprofit, and 85% of my work is very sensitive situations. People that don't want to be seen, people that don't want to have people walking in off the street and asking about a tattoo when they're getting these cover-ups or removals done. And it was perfect. I talked to him. I said, I want it. He said, well, they won't do anything less than a 3-year lease on it. I said, that's fine. Give me a 3-year lease on it. And he goes, Chris, you have to go to Oswego and get a zoning exception. And I don't think they're going to give it to you. I said, bring me the lease tonight. He brought me the lease. I signed it.
You signed it before you got the zoning exception?
Signed it that day.
Whoa.
Gave him the check. We went before the zoning commission in Oswego 3 weeks later. The guy, Brian Leclerc, he was the mayor of Oswego at the time. I didn't really know him, but he knew of me and liked what I did. And he comes up to me before this hearing starts, and he said, do me a favor. We're going to call you up. Don't say a word. And I'm like, I'm a talker. I want to fight for this. I brought my whole church with me. My pastor was there. I was like loaded for bear. I was going to fight this out. We're going to get this. And he said, Chris, trust me. I go, okay. So he goes up there and he calls my ticket. I go up to the podium and he starts talking. And he said, this is Chris Baker, founder of Ink180. This is what he does. And he shows the news clip from WGN. All these people on the zoning committee were like, their eyes were wide open, their jaws were on the table. And he said, I want to put a motion forward to approve this zoning application right now. And it got a unanimous yes. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. Like, this is all God. And I looked at my buddy that was there, the real estate guy. I was like, John, I told you, God was not going to let this fall apart.
I love the power of story.
Yeah.
Again, just even showing the WGN clip, it was the power of story.
Yeah.
God uses it all the time. And when we tell our stories, and you're telling your story right now, there are powerful things happening.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I love now. Like, anytime I get an opportunity to speak at a church or at an event, my landing point every time is, don't leave here and drive to lunch and say, wow, what a great guy. I love what he does. That's so unique or whatever. What I want you to do is I want you to leave here and I want you to go and ask God for your Ink180, because we've all got ministry within us. And I think we overthink it. We try to make decisions that God's already made. I love that I get people that will call me or they'll come and visit and tell me like, hey, I really took that to heart when you said that, and this is what God's got me doing now. And it's some of the coolest stuff that no human being could even think of.
I think there are many of us, myself included, we want to know what our Ink180 is. What would you say are maybe the important elements of the asking and the listening to hear what God's saying?
Well, first with the listening, I know this has been a big issue for me over the years, is we get so bombarded by the static of the world, the news, family stuff, work stuff, that it's hard for us to really center ourselves enough to hear what God's trying to tell us. And it's funny, like a lot of people I say that to, they're like, well, I've never heard God speak from above. And I'm like, it's not necessarily vocal words.
Audible, right.
He'll give it to you in thought. The Holy Spirit's working all the time. And that's what it is. And again, for me, when I got the calling, it was simply go use the gifts I gave you to make people's lives better. And that's it. We all have different gifting. We all have different things that the Lord has blessed us with. And just using that in our day-to-day life to make people's experience with life better is a true blessing, not just to them, but to us also. You know, people say to me all the time, like, Chris, you're such a blessing to the people that you help. I'm like, guys, like, I see the blessing to me as well, because I'm getting a front row seat to watch what Jesus does in their life every single day.
I've heard some people describe this process of like recognizing, okay, what is it I'm called to do? What's my Ink 180? And, it's often the intersection of circumstances, gifting, what are you good at? What are you passionate about? And then also that element of putting room in your life to listen to God so that he can direct your steps. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Absolutely. And I think for me, it was that righteous anger of watching the news every night in Chicago after we moved there. In between the weather report for the next day and them talking about how bad the Bears were, they talked about how many kids got shot in Inglewood that day. And like it was a non-factor, like it didn't matter. I was like, why isn't somebody doing something about this? Why are all these kids like Dante and T and Joe and all these guys, why are they all dying and no one cares about it? What's going on? So I think God will use the things that we dislike about our world to make the change. I used to sit there and watch the news and be like, why isn't somebody doing something about this? And then God was like, knock on the door. You're somebody and you can't do everything, but you can do something. And then I heard Matthew West's song, Do Something. That's my favorite song of my entire life. And I got to meet him and tell him why. And it was amazing. Such an amazingly humble guy. And I love him. I love his music. But I was listening to that song. He's got that line that we're all just angels of apathy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so true. Like, it's one thing to see something going on around you in the world and get upset by it. It's completely different to do something about it.
85% of the work you're doing now, nonprofit, clients, it's sensitive for them. Give examples. You've talked about gang cover-ups, but you're doing more than that.
Yeah. So when we started Ink 180, the ministry side of it, it was all gang stuff. That was where we were focused. But I never put parameters on it. I never make people qualify or jump through hoops to get our help. I was asked to speak at my church about 6 months after starting it, and people got really excited about it because it's different. It's not your typical ministry. And I had a guy run up after me in the parking lot that day in church and introduce himself. He's with Homeland Security. He's like, will you come and speak to my gang unit? They'd love to work with you. I said, yeah, I'd love to set it up. And 2 weeks later, I was driving up for the meeting. He called me and he said, hey, do you mind if our trafficking team sits in on this? They want to hear what you're doing. I said, what does drug trafficking have to do with removing tattoos? And he's like, no, this is sex trafficking. And I had heard very, very little at that point. I had very low information on what sex trafficking was. And I thought it was an over there problem, over there in Asia and in Eastern Europe and such. And I went up, I said, yeah, have them sit in on it. I've always been a person that considered myself to be way more street smart than book smart. So it really bothered me that I had no idea that this was going on. And they spent about 3 hours with me after the gang meeting telling me about sex trafficking and showing me pictures of kids with tattoos forced on them to mark them as property and barcode tattoos and property of tattoos.
This is here in the United States.
Here in the United States, every single corner of this country, every day. The fastest growing crime in the world, estimated 250,000 to 300,000 Americans being sold for sex in this country every day. The average age of entry is 13. Less than 1% of them are ever recovered alive. At the end of that 3 hours, they asked me the dumbest question anyone's ever asked me. They looked at me and they said, Chris, would you be willing to expand your ministry work to help sex trafficking survivors remove these horrible tattoos? And I was like, you guys could have asked me that 3 hours ago and I'd be done with 10 of them already. And we partnered with Homeland Security, which was huge for us. Before that, we were just working with state and local authorities, which we love. But it was our first federal partnership. And of course, the federal government loves free programs that are trying to help people they're trying to help. So they told all their friends. So about a week later, I get a call from the FBI.
Wow.
I got a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then I got a call from the State Department in D.C. And it just started going crazy. I started getting phone calls from safe houses all over the country. And so now, kind of as it stands here in 2025, our core group of folks that we help for free are former gang members, sex trafficking survivors, domestic violence survivors, self-harm survivors who were cutting, and young people going into the military, because there's so many changes all the time about what's allowed as far as tattoos go in the military. So,
and you do all of that for free?
For free, yeah. Yeah, so we've been doing it. We just celebrated our 14th anniversary of the ministry, and we've given over $2.2 million in free services away in 14 years.
Would you have ever imagined?
No. If you would have asked me this, 15 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. And my accountant does it all the time. he's hilarious. He's like, Chris, do you realize that you've given $2.2 million away? And he said, I haven't given anything away. All I've done is I've given away the talent that God gave me to help people to remove those horrible marks that used to define who they were or who someone told them they were. I'm not losing anything. I'm gaining perspective. I'm gaining faith. Like, my faith is so strong, you couldn't do anything to break it. And that's because I see Jesus' handprints in every one of these stories of these people that we get to help.
Tell the story about the tree in your studio.
So, when we started removing gang tattoos, I used to take their bandanas from them because the ministry is all based around 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, anyone who is in Christ is a new creation. The old is dead and the new has come. And I would tell them that bandana represents your old life and it's dead. So we have wires that hang from one end of the shop to the other, and we have them tie those up, and we call it the graveyard because that's where all the old lives are. When we started doing the sex trafficking cover-ups and removals, I wanted to give them kind of that flag in the sand moment of, man, that part of my life is dead, and didn't really know how to portray that, and sat with my wife and my kids at dinner one night, and we were kind of kicking around ideas, and they said, Dad, why don't you paint a tree with no leaves on it? And then you could have them dip their hands in paint, like colored paint, and put their handprint up there to portray the leaves. We call it the Freedom Tree. And it's kind of our homage to Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad of, when people were escaping slavery, they would leave notes at different safe houses along the way to let loved ones know that they were okay. And it was just a way of us not just showing that survivor that part of their life was over, but showing future survivors like, you're not alone. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that this has affected, and you're part of a different family now. And it's just such a cool thing. It's my favorite place to sit and pray. And thank God I had the foresight when we did that to do it on a piece of canvas. So it's not just the wall. So now that it's almost filled up, we're going to take it off that wall, move it up to the front of the shop, and start a brand new one. It's crazy. I wish we had a way to do the handprints for those that we help, because we travel all over the country and the world now. I was in Nepal last year doing removals. It was just insane, but they're all in our heart. I can look at every one of those handprints and I can tell you their story, and I can remember them and pray for them. And it's a tremendous blessing for us.
One of the things I find so inspiring about Chris is that he's always willing to go wherever God leads. He is gearing up for his 9th Super Bowl search in New Orleans, working in conjunction with law enforcement and In Our Backyard, an anti-trafficking organization. There's this massive effort to fight human trafficking. If you want to learn more about that, or if you want to support the work that Chris is doing, visit Ink180.com. It's Ink180.com. If you're near Chicago, he said he loves when people visit his shop in Oswego. And you can head to the Unfolding podcast page on Facebook or Instagram this week and see some photos of Chris's work, the Freedom Tree. You can also follow Chris on Facebook at Ink180 or on Instagram, Ink180Boss. I am so grateful to Chris for sharing his story. Thanks to the Unfolding team, Lindsay Caparoon, Michael Shermack, our producer and network director, Jason Rackow. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.